I should have known something was strange about the place as soon as I saw it. The peculiar stains on the carpet, the old moth-eaten curtains, the thin layer of dust over everything. But the apartment had been cheap, and I'd been desperate. And at the time, I didn't notice the smell of rot or the feeling that something wasn't quite right. For the first few days, I was hardly in the apartment. I'd taken on as many shifts as I could at work to pay for food and bills. And when I wasn't working, I was passed out on the couch asleep. It took me a while to even bother unboxing my meager belongings. And the place never felt like home. Just a place to sleep and eat after a hard day's work. It wasn't until about a week after I'd moved in, my first day off, that I noticed things were a little strange about the place. It was the smell that bothered me first. The smell of decay, something rotting in the shadows. I bought a couple of cheap plug-ins to try and mask it, since I didn't have time to clean or find a source of the smell. It was probably just mold or damp, because the apartment was old and I'd seen water stains on the stairwell outside, but it was stronger in some areas than others, particularly where those gruesome reddish-brown stains were visible on the carpet. I did try to scrub some of them out with stain remover, but it did nothing, so I branded it a waste of time trying to clean it up. Then the scratching started. I figured a place like this probably had a rodent problem. Rats in the walls, that's all it was. It didn't even bother me that much if it was rats, so long as they didn't chew through the walls or cables, until it started to keep me awake at night. I'd be roused from the middle of sleep to the sound of scratching right beside my head. Tiny claws itching at the plasterboard on the other side of the wall, next to where I was sleeping. They would stop and start in little bursts, never straying too far away from my head. I moved the bed, nothing but a makeshift pile of blankets and pillows really, several times. But the noises followed me around the room, almost as though they could sense I was there. Eventually, I moved my bed right into the middle of the room, where those stains had bled into the carpet. I thought that being away from the walls would mean the rats left me alone. But it only got worse. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning when I finally finished my shift and collapsed straight into bed without bothering to change out of my work clothes. I fell asleep almost immediately, as exhausted as I was. I couldn't be sure how long had passed when something woke me up. At first I couldn't recall what it was and lay gazing into the darkness of the room for a few seconds. Then I felt it. Something was tugging at my blankets, right where my feet were. I bolted up, fumbling for my phone to shine a light over the bed, still feeling the pressure of something pulling at the edge of the blanket. Was it a rat? Had they somehow gotten into the apartment now too? I found my phone and switched on the flashlight function, shining it over the room. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a shadow slip out of sight, but it was too dark to see clearly. I pulled up all of the blankets, searching for any sign of the rodent. But there was nothing there. Had I imagined it? Maybe I thought I felt something in my half-asleep state. I shook my head, replacing the bedding and laying back down. The night had gone quiet now. I couldn't hear the rumble of cars or music pounding out of nightclubs. Even the city had fallen silent, but the rats had not. As I lay staring up at the ceiling, I heard the chich-chich of nails. Only this time it was coming from beneath me, beneath the stained carpet, beneath the floorboards, directly beneath my head. If I really concentrated, I thought I could feel it too. The vibrations running through the foundations. I tried to ignore it and fall back to sleep, but the feeling of something tugging at my blankets was still weighing on my mind, and I was starting to wonder if it was a rat at all. I curled up my knees so that my feet weren't near the edge of the blanket and finally drifted off. Things continued like this for the next few days, and I was starting to get more and more fatigued between the brutal work shifts and my sleepless nights. I decided to ditch the bed and sleep on the couch instead. It was in the room across the hall, opposite a small television that hardly had signal most of the time. One night, about 2 weeks after I'd moved there, I was sleeping on the couch when the television turned on by itself. I woke up, leery and confused, to the room filled with stag. Ahead of me, the TV screen was nothing but a grainy black and white picture. Fumbling for the remote, I switched it off and tried to figure out why it had turned on. Some kind of power reset. I couldn't have touched the remote by accident in my sleep since it was on the floor, nowhere near the couch. I tried not to worry about it and was almost drifting off when I felt a shift in the air. It's hard to describe, but it almost felt like I wasn't alone all of a sudden. The shadows seemed too thick, the air felt too still, and a crippling sense of unease began to fill my stomach. I chalked it down to being overworked and exhausted, telling myself it was nothing. I closed my eyes, pulled the covers up to my chin, and jerked awake with a start my eyes wide. Something had touched my cheek, a breath or a whisper I couldn't tell, but I had felt it, like a cold breeze on my skin. I searched frantically through the darkness of the room for any signs of an intruder, but saw nothing. When I finally regained my composure, I got up and switched on the main light. I jumped to my feet, switching on a light. The bowl had no lampshade, hanging loose from the ceiling, but it provided enough illumination to see the room was empty. I knew I hadn't imagined it, but I couldn't rationalize it either. I spent the rest of the night searching the apartment, but I was the only one there, which meant there was only one explanation. The apartment was haunted. I spent the next few days asking around, trying to gather as much information as I could about the apartment, until my search led me to the local library. I found the articles in the library's archive. After typing in my apartment's address, a flood of them appeared on the screen. As I scanned the headlines, it quickly became apparent that I was right. There were news reports dating back to 2013, all the way up to this year. Gruesome murder in downtown apartment. Unsolved murder shakes apartment residents. The tragic death of an unfortunate woman. Residents claim apartment to be haunted by unsolved murder victim. I read enough to know that the apartment had a sordid history and that the past had yet to be put to rest. I also knew that I had too much on my plate to deal with anything beyond the living, so I ended up moving out shortly afterwards, before things could get any worse.
I live in a town of about 11,000 in rural Wisconsin, not by reference but for a job. We are moving when I get a better one. I was on my way to my employer's house. He runs the company out of his basement until we get a new office space. I was being tailgated bad by a ratty blue car and a white bald guy. I drive a Kia Soul which has a flat back end, so if I can't see your headlights, that means you are a mere few inches off my butt, and you will get me tapping my brakes. This guy did. He honked at me, whatever. I flipped him off and slowed down to 5 miles under the speed limit. There wasn't anyone behind me, so I wasn't ruining anyone else's day. He had chances to pass me on the country road, but didn't. After a few minutes with no other cars around, and him still kissing my bumper at 50 miles per hour, I grabbed my cell phone and pretended to turn around quickly and take a picture of him. Then I pretended to call 911. I was in the country with no other cars around, and this guy was getting creepy. I came to my turn but decided to see if this guy would follow me. I turned left and he followed. Then I came to a roundabout and thought I would lose him. I traveled the entire thing around twice, and he still followed me. At this point I knew he was messing with me, trying to scare me. Well, I decided to let myself be late for my meeting. I began to drive to the police station. He had followed me the whole way there. I pulled up and parked, ready to run inside. I thought he would leave. Nope, he parked right next to me and just stared at me, and he pulled up on my side of the car, close enough that I would have a hard time opening the door all the way. He was in his 40s, I'm guessing, wearing sunglasses and a creepy smile. He was wearing fairly neat clothes, nothing scary there. The interior of the car was pristine. I was anticipating to see a gun. I should mention here that I'm training to be a behavior analyst, and while I work with kids right now, my hobby is criminal behavior and profiling. I was seriously trying to read this guy. A few seconds went by and I grabbed my phone again, this time intent on calling 911 from the police station parking lot. As I dialed, he rolled his passenger window down, said nothing, rolled it back up, and took off. I went inside and told an officer what happened. Sadly, I was too focused on not crashing to get a plate number. Apparently, there had been a lot of complaints about tailgaters recently, multiple with a blue car. I filled out a report with the officer, and they gave me a card for victim services in a local woman's shelter, just in case he followed me home one night and I didn't feel safe, but I live in a secure building with my friends. I went out to my car, and there was a note on the windshield. All it had on it was a smiley face. Serious horror movie stuff there. I took it back inside. The officer said he'd call me a few times during the night, and I should avoid going anywhere alone for a while. He did call twice and said he was patrolling my parking lot during his night shift. This is a small town, and the attitude around here is very communal, so I feel safe that someone will back me up. If I ever see this guy again, no question, I will call 911 and lead him straight to the police station again. I'd also told my fiancé that I would post my work schedule, or even when I have to leave for another reason, that if I don't text him within 10 minutes of my estimated arrival, to call 911.
This happened a couple of days ago to me and my girlfriend. We were house sitting for my girlfriend's dad. My girlfriend's dad lives in a rather large house in a suburban neighborhood, just outside one of the major cities in Denmark. What I'm trying to say here is that his neighborhood isn't exactly scary or dangerous by any means, which only meant that this gave us a bigger scare than it probably would have had it been in one of the more dangerous parts of town. After coming home from buying groceries and stocking up on necessity for our weekend stay at his house, we went to the living room to lie down and have some quality time for ourselves, which we hadn't had in a long time. Now, before I go any further, just let me clarify the lay of the land here. This house had a rather large living room and a floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the room. Outside this floor-to-ceiling window is a sensor-triggered light system. As we were lying there watching TV, I get this weird feeling that something is watching me. At first, I try and shake it off, like it's no big deal, thinking to myself it's probably just because I'm in a new house where I don't yet feel entirely at home. But as I look to my girlfriend, I see too that she is quite shaken up about something. After a few minutes of silence, she then asks me if I have the same feeling as her, like someone was watching us. I try to play it off as nothing, and I tell her that I'll just go grab a cigarette and check to see if anyone's out there, just to make her feel safer. As I turn my head towards the floor-to-ceiling window, I notice that the lights are on. Now this shakes me to my very core, and I quickly decide not to go out for that cigarette. By this time, I feel my girlfriend's hand squeezing my arm. As I turn around to her, I see her pointing out one of the windows, and outside is a silhouette of a person. My blood freezes. In that moment, I turn around and quickly grab my phone, and as I turn back, the person had disappeared. I call my parents, as I know they were out at a friend's house not too far from where we were. My dad tells me to lock all of the doors and windows and just sit tight and wait for them to arrive. A couple of minutes go by, and nothing happens other than me trying to get my girlfriend to calm down, as I know how this affects her blood sugar levels, and I would rather not have her have a seizure while a creeper or burglar or even a murderer is walking around outside the house. The silence is then broken by the sound of windows being tampered with. At this point, I'm trying really hard not to freak out and cause any further panic. But luckily, seconds later, I hear my dad pull up outside the house. My girlfriend and I have since discussed who it might have been, and we come up with a few possible suspects, one of them being my girlfriend's crazy mother, who has a severe mental illness. The other more possible suspect would be just a simple burglar. I don't really care who it might have been. I'm just glad whoever it was didn't manage to break in. This past August, I picked up a lot of side jobs house sitting while working at a ranch that gave horseback riding lessons. The families were all very nice and it paid well. This past November, I was house sitting for a family and watching their Labrador retriever named Maggie while they were on vacation. They lived in a very nice neighborhood on the outskirts of a small town. The house was on the far end of the neighborhood, and thick trees flanked the backyard, and a dirt road ran behind the trees. I accidentally went down the road the first time and tried to find the house. There wasn't much down there, just an abandoned house with lots of deer in the front yard, and a small rundown ranch house. The first night everything was great, but the second night not so much. I had this weird feeling a few hours before I went to bed, but I wrote it off as spending too much time reading creepy stories on Reddit. I made sure all the doors were locked, blinds were closed, and I went to bed just after midnight. But as I fell asleep, I still couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Maggie usually sleeps with me, but that night she just followed me up the stairs into the bedroom and then just sulked back downstairs. At 2:26 a.m., Maggie woke me up by standing next to the bed and whining. I had just let her out before I went to bed, and I was pretty sure she didn't have to go to the bathroom. I rolled over and hoped that she would stop, but she didn't. I gave in soon enough, and as I climbed out of bed, I realized that the house was freezing cold. I followed Maggie downstairs to the kitchen. All the doors to the house were weird. You can't open any of them from the inside or outside without a key. Not to mention this was a very heavy door, not the kind that just gets blown open by the wind. The only thing that eased my mind was that Maggie didn't seem ready to kill an intruder, and she'll usually at least bark at you, so I did a quick look around. I was too scared to do anything more. Nothing seemed out of place. The owners often left credit and debit cards, as well as wads of cash lying on the counters, and it was all there. If anyone was going to steal something, it was right next to the door and easy pickings. But since nothing was missing, I tried to brush it off as just forgetting to lock the door. I made sure it was locked this time and went back to bed. Maddie still didn't want to sleep with me and went back downstairs. Less than an hour later, she woke me up again. This time I didn't question her. I crept back downstairs more cautiously than I had before. The back door was open again. This time the key that had been sitting on the kitchen counter was in the lock. Someone had been in the house with me. The police were called. They looked all around the house but found no one. Everything of value was still in place, so I was really worried about the intentions of whoever broke in. The family was shocked that something like that happened, and have since moved to a farm 20 minutes away and now have video surveillance.